Somebody on Dr. Bill said the vaccine
Well, friends, good evening. My name is Jackson Hudecki. How's everyone doing tonight? All right, great. I am the Vice President on the Board of Directors of the Hamilton Naturalist Club, former Bird Study Group Director. I followed the one and only Bruce McKenzie, who's in the crowd tonight, so I'm feeling a little honored of your presence, sir. I'm here because Rob Porter is delivering a talk tonight to the Durham Field Naturalist Club about the work that he does in song and bird recording. So he asked me to step in. So I'm here and trying to figure out, and Rob's going to see this, all of Rob's tech wizardry. We are live streaming on YouTube as we've started doing this year, thanks to Rob. And the list of how to get that going on YouTube was long. So I've spent the last hour trying to figure all that out. We've got extra mics and extra cameras. So after this season is over, next year you can't attend a bird study group meeting. You can attend it and you watch it online or even watch it after the fact. Thanks to Rob. So well done, Rob. Also happy to see people here tonight because there is clearly a lot going on. There is an election happening today, so when we get home, I'm sure we'll all be tuning into the results of that. And hopefully people voted with nature in mind. I know that's something that I keep in mind. So perhaps you exercise your democratic right today, and we'll see where we are in probably 12 hours from now, what the world will look like. There's also a hockey game on soon. There's usually 5 or 6 gruff gentlemen who sit over there, who I think are all watching the game tonight instead of being here. Maybe they're at home watching, I'm not too sure. So thank you for being here tonight on behalf of the Naturalist Club and the Bird Study Group. This is our last Bird Study Group meeting of this year. And I'll get to our very last meeting of the year on behalf of the Naturalist Club. But this is the last Bird Study Group meeting. We are then off June, July, and August, and we regroup again back in September. So hopefully after tonight, you can utilize these lovely spring and summer evenings by going birding and spending time outside, because I know just being out there today and this weekend, it's just prime time. And I'll get to some cool bird sightings shortly. So this is the agenda for the evening, which I'll cover all those momentarily. Is anyone here not a member of the Hamilton Naturalist Club? Show of hands and it's okay. All right, well, that's all right. There's a chance to do so. We've been a club since 1919, so every membership counts. And we are made up of plenty of volunteers and 2 staff members. I should also note that it is National Volunteer Week in Canada. So raise your hand if you're a volunteer somewhere in the world. If you're volunteering somewhere, look at that. Congratulations. Thank you for wherever you volunteer. Is anyone a volunteer of the Hamilton Naturalist Club or for the Hamilton Naturalist Club? Incredible. Thank you. So Michael Rowland just raised his hand. So sitting in the middle of the room is someone who has been taking detailed notes of every bird study group meeting for the last, I want to say 17 years. 20 or so. And then he transcribes the meeting and puts it in the next copy of the Wood Duck or a future copy of the Wood Duck. So let's give a quick round of applause to Michael. He has seen director after director come through, and he's got notes on all of us that he doesn't share with anybody. It's going to come out in his memoir. So if you are not, and if you're tuning in from home and you're not familiar with HNC, we cover a 25-mile, 40-kilometer radius from the center of Dundurn Castle, and we kind of study the contents within that study area. And within that study area, of course, are lands that have been occupied by Indigenous people for time immemorial, including a lot of our including all of our HNC properties. There's a really great event happening this weekend, I believe, at the Ancaster Fairground. Rob gave me this presentation, and I wanted to include these notes myself, but if you are interested in learning more, it is a great gathering happening over the course of this weekend coming up, and members of Six Nations will be coming together to deliver presentations to the public, and it's something really incredible. I myself will be birding for the next 4 days after this, well, I guess on Wednesday. So if you're looking for something to do and to learn more about Indigenous communities, that would be something great to attend. For the Naturalist Club, these are our nature sanctuaries, and we have a new one that we are opening up soon. There's a tree planting event, in fact, happening at the Pine Hill Nature Sanctuary coming up this week. So your membership and your attendance at these events and your awareness of what's happening with the Naturalist Club goes a long way, because it allows us to put people, put staff, put eyes and ears, put brains on all these sanctuaries to continue to protect nature forevermore. And so anytime someone is talking to you about nature and they're looking for a group, a place to be a nerd, send them to us. Send them to the HNC. So it's great if you could become a member, and you can be active within the Naturalist Club as little or as much as you would like. As I mentioned, you could take part in volunteering in our nature sanctuaries. You could be writing for the Wood Duck. You could be leading events for us. But when in doubt, observing is a lot. So just taking part in our social media. And if you're on Discord, you can join our Hamilton Nature Discord channel and keep up with the chatter that's happening there. Because the goal of this group is really just to bring people together to talk a lot about our feathered friends. So our bird of the month is, and raise your hand if you saw the glossy ibis last week. Anyone here see this bird? Bruce?
I was away.
What? Okay,
On that day.
I'm calling attention to Bruce, because this was seen on the Department of National Defense property right beside the Grimsby wetlands, for which Bruce and his wife Lori spend countless hours protecting, planting, maintaining. And it popped up on Discord that this glossy ibis was there, and I saw lots of photos of it, which was great. But with a bird like this showing up means that migration is on, and it's a very exciting time of year. So again, Rob put these slides together for us, and so he's been keeping track of some of the neat birds that have been seen. Show of hands of anyone who saw the barnacle goose that showed up in Hamilton. We got one. Anyone see the loggerhead shrike that showed up here? I know we've got a couple. Well, Sean over there found it, for goodness sake. In one word, how was that experience?
It was amazing, and kind of a surprise too. I've put together a write-up for the Wood Duck about it.
Okay.
So I'm not going to say anything else. It's amazing.
So in a future Wood Duck, look for an article on the loggerhead shrike, which I think is in an area that northern shrike have been seen. So it was kind of, there was a few shrike in the area, and it was upon further observation that it was noted that it was a loggerhead shrike, which is great. Louisiana water thrush is a really cool one, because I don't want to say they're early, but they're on breeding ground in the HSA already, which is cool. Brant, golden eagle, fish crow. I was able to spy the white-eyed vireo. Show of hands of anyone who saw that in Stony Creek. Did anyone make the trek to see that bird? We got one or two. That's great. So western grebe and American goshawk are the two latest hot species, if you will. The western grebe has been seen from, I guess, like the Bronte area, and the goshawk was being chased by a Cooper's hawk, which I think a lot of people would confuse the two species together, to the untrained eye perhaps, but because one was chasing the other, it allowed for some pretty good ID to set a goshawk apart from a Cooper's. So this is great. These are the notable birds, because we're at the start of peak migration, and I've been getting yellow-rumped warblers in my backyard. I know chipping sparrows are around. So we're going to start seeing some pretty incredible birds. And I hope that you all get a chance to get outside and explore and find some cool birds yourself. Anyone feel like sharing a bird that they're hoping to see during migration? It's all right. Yeah?
Scarlet tanager.
Scarlet tanager. I'm hoping to see a summer tanager. That's going to be a lifer for me if I see one of those.
So go to Long Point. It's there, or was.
Okay. Anyone else have a target species they want to see this spring? Just thought I'd throw it out there. You go. Okay. Now, speaking of target species, target birds, peregrine falcons specifically target other birds to eat. We have some representatives from the Falcon Watch team here to share a couple words. And the one and only Matthew Mills is going to join us on stage to share an update about the Falcon Watch. Let's put our hands together for Matt.
Hey everyone, so just wanted to spend a few minutes and highlight the upcoming year of the Falcon Watch. It's been over 30 years since peregrines have been nesting on the Sheraton Hotel downtown. Many of you have probably been down there to see them. Last year there were 3 eggs laid, and one of the chicks unfortunately died in the nest, but 2 of the chicks fledged very successfully. They're very strong flyers right out of the gate. This year, the website's showing very small here, but you can visit the Falcon Watch website. The URL is there, Hamilton Nature. It's hosted by the club. You can see that there's already 4 eggs laid, so we're anxiously awaiting for those eggs to hatch. In a couple weeks' time, when the chicks are a little bigger, not ourselves, but we'll get some folks to rappel into the nest, and they'll get the chicks, and the chicks will be banded, and then the chicks will be named based on their characteristics, if they're male or female. And usually we go with names that sort of represent the area. We've named chicks in the past from Hamilton streets and Hamilton neighborhoods. So I'm not sure the theme or the names that we're searching for this year, but that will happen. That will be one of the first exciting things that happens. And from there, we'll be looking for volunteers to conduct the Falcon Watch. We have a really good core of long-term volunteers, but each year we need new folks to come out. A couple of the benefits of volunteering for the Falcon Watch are it's right in the city core, so there's no mosquitoes and there's no ticks. And the shifts are very short, like 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. We have some volunteers that come every day or the same day every week. But we're happy to accept any commitment to the Falcon Watch, even if you just come once, come for 2 hours. For those who don't know, what we do is once the chicks fledge, they sometimes get into trouble. They sometimes will sort of practice flying on the nest ledge, and they'll fall off the nest ledge before they're really adept at flying. And they don't usually get into terrible trouble. They don't sort of splat down onto the street, but they'll glide down into an area they might not be able to get out of. And we have the resources and the training and the protocol to rescue them from that scenario and to see if they require any further care, if they're injured or if they're okay, and then to relocate them back close to the nest ledge. So really what the volunteers are doing is keeping an eye on the birds when they have that chance of misadventure. So a lot of the time, obviously, there's no misadventure. We're simply observing the birds doing peregrine falcon things, which is pretty exciting. You can watch them hunt and watch them bring birds to the chicks and watch the chicks feed and watch the chicks take their first flight. I think last year we had, most of what they feed on is obviously the common birds of the city, right? Pigeons and starlings and house sparrow. Every once in a while, whether or not that's your thing, we see them bring other interesting birds to the nest. What are some, we've seen like Baltimore oriole, red-winged blackbird. Occasionally they'll bring a duck. It's not for everyone, but it's interesting to see what the peregrines are feeding on and what they're feeding the young. So another exciting development this year is we have t-shirts. Some of you will know Paul Riss, local member of the club, artist. He's designed stuff for other, I'm not sure about the club, but he's designed t-shirts and he's done design for the American Birding Association and for some festivals in Canada and the United States. Very excellent designers. So Pat and Lee are wearing the shirts there if they'd like to stand up. Like I can show the shirt here. So one thing we really wanted to do was highlight the importance of the Peregrine Falcon to the city and the importance of a relationship with the Sheraton Hotel. For over 30 years, they've really gone out of their way to ensure the Peregrine's safety and to ensure that there's engagement with the city and the community. So the t-shirt highlights the Peregrine's home and the Sheraton's commitment to their conservation. So yeah, we don't have it here on the screen, but if you're interested in volunteering or if you're interested in purchasing a t-shirt, please approach Pat or Leah or myself at the end of the meeting, and we can work that out. We can give you an email to contact us by, or we can take down your email address if you're looking to volunteer. Was there anything else?
There is a button there that says volunteer,
Oh, okay.
and that comes to me.
All right.
So,
Okay, so perfect. So the website itself, you can volunteer right through that portal. So yeah, it would start, we're looking for volunteers mostly for the month of June, maybe sort of the last few days of May or the first few days of July, but the bulk of Falcon Watch is in the month of June between the hours of 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. when the birds are active and on the ledge, right on the Sheraton downtown. So thank you. Does anyone have any questions about the Falcon Watch or anything? Okay, thank you for your time. Thanks, Jackson.
Pat, you're not going to rappel down yourself. Not this year. Pat, I think, has been volunteering for the Falcon Watch program, I want to say for over 30 years.
No, it's actually 25, 26.
I rounded up to 30, 25, 26 years. Leah, how about you?
it wasn't in a long time.
And Matt?
Once when I was a teenager and last year. 1.5 years.
So Matt's going to be more of the boots on the ground with all of this, and I know that the perch to watch the Falcons is in the McMaster building, so you're kind of perched up in a little balcony.
No, right on just by the park.
Oh, in the park, okay, yeah, I knew it was connected to the building.
But we have tremendous access through the buildings there to get up to where we need to get to look for this.
Great. Well, best of luck. And yeah, congrats on all the success of keeping those chicks alive during the fledgling season. So as I mentioned earlier, in terms of birding activities, because the birds are starting to arrive en masse, this is a typical peak season, but last year and this year, I'm hearing more murmurations of migration starting sooner, with rarer species happening before like the typical peak window. So definitely get out to any of your local woodlots in the next little while and look for birds. The Niagara Peninsula Hawk Watch is currently still on, and there are some pretty incredible sightings happening along the Hawk Watch Tower. And the Breeding Bird Atlas is in its final year, so it's in year 5. And if you see any sign of birds mating, of birds building nests, birds on the nest, birds feeding young fledging the nest, any of those sightings will allow you to submit data so that they can understand what species is breeding where, to paint a huge picture of 5 years of breeding in Ontario. There won't be another study like this for probably another 10 years or so. So if you see something, you can sign up and report it on birdsontario.org. We have a birding outing at Falkirk Forest this Sunday at 8 a.m. So if you're not aware of the controversy that's happening in that area, it's a big, beautiful forest, and some development is happening that they just tore through a bunch of trees and are putting a house down right in that forest. So it'll be interesting to see the impact that may have or has had on wildlife in that area. But in order to understand it, it's good to experience it. So if you want to go on a cool outing and check out Falkirk Forest, Paul Baldassi will be leading that walk, as well as Ashira Fernando. They will take you out and walk you through the forest. There's a lot of kind of rogue trails there, Anytime I've been, I kind of get a little lost in there, so it'd be good to go with a few people leading it. So if you have any questions, reach out to them. Otherwise, that's happening this weekend, which is great. And Dina and Catherine's not here, have been providing refreshments for these meetings for a while. So let's first give a round of applause to Dina. So Catherine is stepping away from being able to do that. There's a few other folks who've stepped up to volunteer. If you've been enjoying the treats, feel free to leave a monetary thank you. And if you are ever able to contribute with a tray of something at a future meeting, check in with at least Dina for sure, and Ellen as well. Helen, yeah, thank you. And because they are going out of their way to bring food and snacks for us to eat. They told me also that when you leave here, if there's any food out there, grab some stuff on your way. They don't want anything on those trays after this meeting is over. So on May 12th is our last general meeting, our last monthly meeting. And so Cores and Connections to Conserve Nature with Mary Gartshore. So that will be really interesting to hear about, and it'll be something to kind of set us off into the spring and summer, hungry for more nature sightings, and something to look forward to. Our first speaker in September will be George, and he'll be delivering a talk on Hawkcliffe Raptor Banders, 60 years and counting. And he's a phenomenal photographer, so that will be our first presentation to kick things off in September. So with that, our speaker tonight is going to be talking about something interesting where when I was sharing to my kids what the talk was tonight, it was going to be about great horned owls. They were like, oh, that's so cool. I'm like, yeah, but I'm going to learn about perhaps how they're contributing negatively to an ecosystem. And they were like, how can that, are they introduced? Are they and like, no, they're a native species. So I am going to just cut this here, and I'm going to introduce our speaker. So please, let's put our hands together for Helen. Come on up here. While I learn Rob's technology and try to flip from one presentation to the other. That's not it. Should be good. All right.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this. This was a contract that I got in 2023. The original project was sort of thought of by the Royal Saskatchewan Museum and the University of Regina, and they had this topic that they really wanted to research. And so they went out looking for a master's student to hire for that. So in the center there, you'll see Tori Hartley-Cox was the master's student that they brought on to conduct this research, and then they needed a field team. So they brought on me as the lead field technician, and then when Tori had to head back and start running all the data, then Aaron Gilbert came in as my second in the field to complete our work. And our fourth unpaid member was Randy McCullough, and he's a native Saskatchewaner, absolutely amazing human. He does raptor banding, primarily of chicks, so he does stuff like ferruginous hawks, the great horned owls, the Swainson's hawks, all out on the prairies, and he bands nestlings every year as part of population monitoring. So, very cool guy, and he helped us a lot with no monetary compensation, but we had a great time. So the first question, I think, is obviously why. So great horned owls are a species we actually know a lot about, and I think that's because they're very cool looking. They're my favorite animal for sure, even before this project. And because of that, people have studied them a lot. We know that they're an apex predator, so in an ecosystem, they eat pretty much everything they can get their hands on, even things that are heavier than themselves. So they're the only, I believe, the only known predator of skunks to regularly eat skunks. They'll also take on something like a raccoon, they'll eat ducks, they'll eat smaller things like mice, rats, rabbits. They'll even, in some of our data we collected, eat things like snakes or things like salamanders. So they'll eat pretty much anything that they can crush. And if they could wrap their claw around your skull, they could crush that too. So thank goodness their feet aren't that big. But because of that, and because they can fly away and they live in trees, there's not really anything that predates them, which does make them an apex predator. Sometimes the chicks get eaten or the eggs get eaten, but as an adult, they don't really have anything to worry about. The next thing is sort of what I was describing with all their food, is that they are a generalist. So they don't have a specific ecosystem that they prefer for the most part. They can adapt, which is why you'll often find them in places like cities. You can hear them at night. They are one of the first of the many raptors to move into cities, although I know more, even ravens, are moving in now. And their way of hunting and the way they reproduce is really the biggest restriction on where they can live and how they can live. So the great horned owl is a tree nester. I know that in Europe they're a close relative. The eagle owl will nest on the ground, but our great horned owl does not enjoy nesting on the ground, so they require a tree, or in some cases a cactus, to have their nest on. And the other restriction they have is that they are a sit and wait predator. They have a decently heavy body for their wing size, and because of that, soaring low and slow is not very good energy-wise for them, so they're going to look for a post to sit on, they're going to listen and look for prey, and then they're going to swoop down and grab it. So because of that, this here is where they live. So the light green is great horned owl land, and then if we look at the tree line, you can see it there, that wiggly line is almost identical. And that's because you'll find great horned owls pretty much anywhere in Canada, and then if you go south into the States, pretty much anywhere where there's trees, you will find great horned owls. And there's a lot of cold temperatures up there, so I don't think it's the cold cutting them off. I do think it's those trees that they want to nest in and they need to sit in to hunt. Now, being everywhere, they do eat everything, and sometimes that runs into a bit of a problem for us and how we're trying to manage our ecosystems. Does anyone know what species this was? It was found in a great horned owl nest that we went up to, and it's a scrap of prey. I heard burrowing owl. You got it. So that's a burrowing owl leg. And so they do eat species at risk. Not particularly, but in with everything else is the species at risk. And in a lot of places that's not a problem because they are a native species and they would have been there historically, and so the species at risk should be able to have strategies to withstand the predation pressure of a great horned owl. But that's a little different when you look at somewhere like Saskatchewan. So in the past, this is what Saskatchewan would have looked like. Pre-Western influence. And this is pretty high up in the sky, but you can see it's a large open expanse. It's the prairies. It's very dry, it's very windy, it's very arid. There's not a lot of large vegetation out there. And then along the top you can see a river running through it because the water has to go somewhere, and around that river is greener. And what happened out in the prairies is because there wasn't a lot of water and it was just in those river valleys, that's where all the large vegetation would grow. Large herds of things like antelope, things like deer, things like bison would move through those big grassy expanses, and they'd eat kind of everything. So if you were a shrub trying to grow, you would just get obliterated, and there's no other shrubs around to blow in their seeds, so there's just no shrubs. Meanwhile, grass can propagate fairly fast, and when it's cut down to its roots, it regrows. But then around those river areas, there's a lot more water. So if you're a shrub or a tree, you can grow a lot faster. And then if you get eaten, that water is bringing down seeds from northern Saskatchewan, so all the trees and all the shrubs. So in those riverine areas, you're going to get vegetation that's going to be a little taller, so things like shrubs and trees. But then in those large expanses, you might have the odd tree or shrub that made it through. But the chances of that being enough to have a great horned owl nest and great horned owl perches for hunting is very, very low. So the great horned owls historically would have been restricted to around those river areas where there was enough vegetation for them. Another restriction for great horned owls is that they're very lazy, as I learned. So they won't build a nest. They will wait for a nest to already exist. And I don't know if they lay their eggs early in spring because they want first dibs on all the nests or because they just don't care about the cold. But they're always out there first. They're probably the first bird to sit down to lay eggs, so they get first dibs on all of the hawk nests from the year previous. So a lot of hawks get kicked out if they built a particularly nice looking nest. But because of that, so you need enough trees that a hawk decided to nest there last year. A great horned owl came in, thought it looked good enough, and there were enough perches. So this is how it worked, and a lot of species at risk, because of that, adapted to live in those more open areas. And then the Western influence came in, and we didn't really like those. We liked the idea of trees giving us shade. Although there were a lot of the native groups that did live out in the prairies, they would move around. They were very nomadic. So planting something like a shrub to give you shade when you're going to move away in a week didn't make any sense. But when people came in and wanted to homestead, they wanted to farm and ranch, it made sense to put some trees. You're going to get protection from wind, protection from snow, and then you could grow things. And then as that happened, people expanded into cities, and all these trees started to show up. So because of that, the great horned owls moved into these places they didn't previously occupy. And while we were planting all those trees, we were also obliterating all the native species. So there was a lot of species at risk that started to develop. And as soon as they were at risk, these great horned owls were moving in, and then there was another pressure present. This has become particularly hard because of what we've really gotten into, which is reintroductions. And I do love reintroductions, especially when you bring habitat back so that a species that was there before can be reintroduced. The problem with reintroductions in Saskatchewan and Alberta and the prairies is they're finding about 75% of the time you put that animal back and a great horned owl has a snack, and that's about it. So they were finding this is a significant problem, not just for burrowing owls. There's actually studies that have been done that have proven that great horned owls are causing the extinction in certain areas of ferruginous hawks, things like the kangaroo rat, things like the, what else is there? Any species at risk you can think of out there, it's a problem. So the issue is we need them to exist long enough to get used to their area, to up their population enough to withstand the predation pressure of great horned owl. And because they didn't have any way to get rid of all the great horned owls right away, the Saskatchewan wanted a strategy. And the only strategy in Canada that anyone had been using was Alberta's. And Alberta's strategy is currently to go out and shoot all the great horned owls in sight. And I think you guys can understand why that doesn't sell so well to the public. Shooting owls, especially a native owl, is never a good look. But on top of that, it's also very expensive. So you have to have people going out regularly to shoot the owls, because if you shoot one, another will come. And they're out there searching too. So that's a couple of permanent positions for a few hundred kilometers of people going out and looking for owls and then shooting owls, and the public doesn't like it. And Saskatchewan hadn't done anything yet, and they didn't have a lot of money, and they were a little worried that the public would hate them. So the government was not going to go with that plan. But nothing else existed to exclude great horned owls from certain areas where species at risk were going to be introduced or where the last little population did exist. So the idea that people came up with was this. So in the center is a nice little circle. That's where you're going to put your species at risk back, or where the last little stronghold exists. And then around that, we have our yellow zone. And the idea was that we could cut back trees in a circle around those species at risk so that there was not good habitat for great horned owls. Our theoretical great horned owls are the little green stars would be their nests, and then the green circles would be their territory. The idea would be that those trees would be so far outside that the radius would not touch the species at risk inside. And that seemed like a great idea. There's not a lot of trees in some places in Saskatchewan, so this was certainly something that could be feasible. The issue is that because great horned owls live in so many places, their territory size varies wildly. And there'd been no studies to see what size of territory a great horned owl would have in the prairies, so they didn't know how far back you'd have to cut. They also didn't know exactly how many perches or what type of perches that they would want around their solitary tree with a nest in it. So we needed to figure out a little more about what they were selecting for and the radius that they were going to have. Added into that, we wanted to look at a few different habitat types. So on the far side, that's sort of open native prairie. So for a bit, this was going extinct because the government had come in and said, if you want to farm cattle, you need to plant grass from Europe too. But that's been taken away, and there's a lot of incentives now and a lot of movement in the cattle ranching community to have native grasses. They do a lot better, and the cattle are fine on them. But then on top of that, you have these cattle replacing the bison in the prairie ecosystem. And suddenly you have all of the birds back and all of the snakes back and all those native species thriving, minus the bison. And minus your major predators. There's no more wolves in a lot of Saskatchewan and no more grizzlies. But otherwise, it's a fairly sustainable prairie ecosystem. So there's a lot of nice prairie out there now. Another major ecosystem in southwestern Saskatchewan is your farmland. So cropland, it's got one crop, heavily farmed. And then the final one, although we would not be excluding the great horned owls, we did want to see the sort of territory size that a river ecosystem would impact. So I don't know if anyone here has been to Saskatchewan. I had not been to Saskatchewan, so it was a bit of a shock for me. They call it Land of the Living Skies. It's beautiful, but either you're staring up at it because it's beautiful or you're running away from it because the storm's coming in. So we ended up putting our base down in Val-Marie, and Val-Marie's claim to fame is that they have not one, but 2 grain silos. So you can see one there. And on the big map, that's southwestern Saskatchewan. So the American border is the yellow line at the bottom. You can kind of see the white lines along the edge. That's the provincial border. And then the road with the little maple leaves is Highway 1. The bright green area was our study area, and we based that on the prairies. So that's all the prairie habitat. And then the little yellow house is Val-Marie. Val-Marie has about 100 people in there. And it's the closest you can get to Grasslands National Park. So if anyone's ever been there to look at the birds, that's probably where you stayed. So if you haven't been to Saskatchewan, if you drive in and you look at the side of your car window, this is what you see. And if you decided you want a change of scenery and you wanted to look at the front of your car, this is what you see. So it's pretty flat. One thing I hadn't thought about though, was that when it's pretty flat and it's pretty empty, you see all the wildlife. So some of it's large, of course, so there's still some reintroduced bison out there in many areas. Of course, we also have pronghorn, our only antelope. There weren't a lot of trees, but if you found one tree, there was always a porcupine in it. Ferruginous hawks, and then even mountain bluebirds. So our main plan was to first find some nests of great horned owls. We had a couple of different approaches. We had a citizen science report that was going around, and then of course our birding skills. Citizen science reports are great, but when a lot of the people living in the prairies don't have cell reception, let alone internet, it's a little hard for them to participate. And then we were going to catch the males because the females would be sitting on a nest. She's not going to tell us how big the habitat is, but hopefully he's out there hunting, showing us the extent. We were going to put a transmitter on the male and then download the transmitter data. And then with that, the idea was that we would get a fairly accurate size of the territory, and then we would go and look at what he was sitting on within that territory to see what sort of perches were perches that they would prefer to sit on. So the first step was nest searching. We got a fairly good turnout for the citizen science. There was about 750 entries to go through. And I would say people were pretty good at identifying great horned owls. Once in a while we got something else, but mostly that. We did do some night surveys, so we'd go out to an area we thought should have an owl and we would play a call and see if they called back. But typically we just drove up and down the roads. There's not a lot of roads in southwestern Saskatchewan, so you can pretty much cover them all. And if you're there with a spotting scope, you just drive until you spot a tree, and then you check the tree to see if anyone's sitting in it. So a lot easier than finding nests here. Of course, they weren't all in trees. This lady decided that a windowsill of a barn was a very good spot to sit. So nest spotting, although there might only be one tree, can be a little tricky. So there is a female great horned owl in this picture. I'll give people another 5 seconds, and then we'll zoom in, and then I will circle it. All right, we're gonna zoom in. A few people got it. Right there. So that's her nice eyebrow going up to the top. So once we had located a nest, we would usually wait until we knew the young had hatched. We didn't want to spook them off the nest. Typically, they're pretty attached to the nest. We did have a female. We knew she was sitting on eggs. We came back one day and there's a porcupine sitting in the nest. So we were pretty sure the porcupine had climbed up and eaten the eggs and she just left. The next day we came back and there was no porcupine and she was sitting on the nest again. So we started to wonder if we'd hallucinated the whole thing. And then we came back the next day and the porcupine was there again and she was not there. And the porcupine was there for a few days. He had a really nice long nap and then he left and she sat back down and those eggs hatched. So pretty hard to take them off a nest, but we still didn't want to. So we would wait until we knew the chicks had at least hatched, and then we would try and catch the male. So the males are not very aggressive. Females are, the males were not. You have to try and catch them right next to the nest. So we would keep an eye on the female the entire time, and if she started to get agitated, we would back off. But typically you'd want to be there, he's going to be at his most defensive. When you're trying to trap a great horned owl at the nest, there's a few things you want. First off, you want clouds, because especially there's no other cover, probably almost no shrubs, there's no buildings. So when the moon is out and the stars are out, it's very bright. We even had some nights, because it could get down to -40, that we'd put out our nests and they'd immediately be covered in hoarfrost, which glistens under the moon. So that's when we learned that if you spray oil, like vegetable oil, they don't hoarfrost up. So our truck just smelled like vegetable oil for the rest of the summer. But you also want shrubs. So any other shrubs near the nest are perfect. You can try and put the net so that they don't see the silhouette. They're looking at the net and behind it is shrubs sort of disguising it. Another thing you don't want is wind. So of course, as soon as there's wind and the net is flapping, they can see it. If you can see it, they can see it. And most of the time we could see it, which is why having something in your net to get them to fly into it is so important, which is where our favorite coworker comes in. This is us setting up the net. BuboBot. So BuboBot was a animatronic great horned owl, and he moved his head, and he sat out in the bushes the first night. A great horned owl came in, hit him, and BuboBot no longer moved. By the end of the summer, BuboBot was missing a good number of feathers, and his top of his head was a toupee that we stuck on with super glue every night. But he was very effective, so we'd sit him there in the bushes, and you can kind of see bright blue at the bottom is a little speaker. We had to buy a few speakers because at -40 degrees they die pretty fast. But you'd put the speaker out there, you'd put BuboBot out, just like this, and you would play a great horned owl defensive territory calls. And the idea would be that he would be a male coming in looking to take this territory, and with any luck, your male you're trying to target is going to come in and attack BuboBot. In reality, the males were not that interested in attacking BuboBot, so it would usually take about 4 nights to try and catch a male. We had one that went in within 1 hour, and then we had some that we just never got. because they just decided to give up their territory. So this is Aaron sitting and waiting. Sometimes you would sit there from dusk till dawn. Another issue is the males typically only come back to the nest to feed the female. So he might roost somewhere else entirely in the day, and you're waiting for him to hunt something and come back. So you've set up your nets, Booba butts in the bushes, you're hoping the batteries aren't dying in your speaker, you're sitting there in the cold, and he just never comes. He brought a big rabbit last night, and he thinks the lady's fine. So, although we did have, it was really sweet. They were quite different from each other. We had one male, never came in for Boobobot, so very non-aggressive, but he was very attentive. He would come at sunset, and the female would get off her eggs, and they'd go sit on the same branch, on the same tree, and they would hoot at each other for about 5 minutes, and then he'd go off and hunt, and she'd go back to her nest. But if you got one, we had a night scope. So this is an owl in a tree. In reality, you would just see pitch black. And then if he was really interested, we'll see if the video plays. You'll see his eyes, the eyes shine. There we go. When he turns his head around. There, and then he's gonna hoot. So the more you get him doing that, the more likely he is to take off from that perch. As you can see, he's not sitting on a branch of a tree. They really like sitting on top of things. So on top of dead trees, big sticks. So assuming that you actually caught the male, that's when we would put everything on them. So first they got a health check. Luckily, all our males were ready they were all fat enough to take a transmitter. We would put a metal band on, just as per normal banding, and then he'd be outfitted with his swanky backpack. So the baby hat was an attempt to stop them from biting us. It just made you not know where the bite was coming from. But this was the backpack we were putting on. The bright red is just to show you where it was. We would bury the straps under the feathers so they were tight against the body. On the back, we have two types of transmitter. So the big brown one was a satellite transmitter. So every 10 minutes, it would check in with the satellites and it would take a GPS location of where that owl was at. But we needed to download that data, and we didn't think we were going to be able to catch the owls again because they were hard enough to catch the first time, and now they knew our tricks. So to get that data off, it would send that data out once every 10 minutes. And if you were close enough, within about, they said 100 meters, it was more like 30 meters. If you were within about 30 meters with a little antenna on your laptop, you could download that data off. Now, it couldn't transmit any further because if it had to transmit it further, it would have been heavier. It would have had to have a bigger battery. So to refine the owl to download that data, we had the little gray guy on. So he's your more typical just radio tracker. So we could walk around with a really big antenna, and it would go beep, beep, beep. And you would go try and triangulate where he is and spot him, get close enough, and download your data. As with everything in science, easier said than done. With the lack of trees, you'd think we would be able to find them, but the VHF signals bounced. And there's not a lot of stuff out there in Saskatchewan. So when it bounced, it would go a long way because it's flat, and then it would bounce off this barn, and it would end up over here, and you could be like a kilometer away from the owl and think you were getting close. So we did a lot of walking around. But we did manage to get our points. So this is an example of our downloaded data from one of the owls. All the red dots are points that we got off of where he was. So you can see a river system running through, and you can see that he stuck mostly along that river system, and that's because the river system was where most of the perches were. But also you can see how far he went. So we had caught him at the nest, which is in the center there where most of the points were. And we were trying to find this gentleman in the day, and sometimes he was 9.3 kilometers away, at which point you get no signal whatsoever. But we thought it was pretty cool to see how far they would go. A lot of previous studies that have been done have a lot smaller territories, which maybe makes sense. Maybe prey density is higher and perch options are higher, whereas here it can be a lot more sparse. So with this data, we then went out to the points. We didn't go to all of them. We went out to some randomly selected points, and then we did vegetation surveys. It took us a lot of fun places. We crossed a lot of railways. We found some big ponds. So in Saskatchewan, when it does rain and there's all the snow melts in spring, all these big sort of lakes and ponds show up, and a lot of ducks fill them, and then they dry up as the summer goes along until you get what you can see on the far right, which is sort of just a wasteland. But we did notice a lot of the owls that would pick to have their nest near one of those big lake or pond systems. And they would absolutely fill up with ducks. The ducks would have their babies, and then they would take off. And the owls would eat ducks and ducks and ducks and ducks. And then as soon as their young would fledge, they'd move the young closer to somewhere where there was a better rodent population, because your ducks would have been gone. We also ended up in town a few times. We had us behind people's barbecues and the only golf course in southwestern Saskatchewan. They were mystified why they had so many mosquitoes, but I think they were the only place that had sprinklers as well, so water was doing something. There was a few challenges that we faced gathering this data the whole way along. The first was that for a place so dry, it got a lot of snow. So when the snow was over our heads, it would just blow across the road and fill in, and you'd be driving behind the snow plow and it would be filling in behind you. You also couldn't walk off the road to do anything when the snow was that high. So we were really looking forward to spring. And then the roads flooded and the road washed out. So there was some restrictions on where we could get to and when. The traffic was also terrible. If there was any sort of ungulate, it was always standing on the road, and they weren't used to cars, so they wouldn't move. And then when you went off the road, of course, everything wanted to hurt you. Of course, we had the beautiful prairie rattlesnakes all around, and then we also had prickly pear cactus. There is one that if you step close to it, its propagation strategy is to sort of eject a little nodule, which sits on your clothes, and then you walk and then you say, oh no, I have a cactus, and you take it off, and then it propagates there, which is great for the cactus and very painful for you. There was also a lot of fences out there. So if you're a mule deer, you climb over the fence, and then if you are a pronghorn antelope, you went underneath. But luckily we did manage to get a lot of results, and they've been run through all the statistics, and they are all significant. We found 197 pairs, so that was including the citizen science when we had enough data to confirm, and 157 nests, and we put up 19 transmitters. One was on a female. We got a pair of owls where they did not breed. So she was out hunting, she didn't sit on any nest, she didn't have a brood patch. We think she was probably too skinny in the spring that year to breed, but then by the time we caught her, she was heavy enough, so 19 transmitters. And then we did run the territories, and they were different depending on your habitat. So the big red guy is prairie, so grassland. The purple on the inside is cropland, so your farm. And then yellow is very satisfyingly the half and half, and it fell right in between. Some other intriguing results we got were on our perch data collection. So even when there was a bird with a very large habitat, their core use area was 0.5 kilometers squared around the nest. So they did spend a lot of time quite close to the nest, even when they were going on further prey runs. Something else we found was the preferred perches. So they were about 5 to 10 meters high. We did find oftentimes if there was something taller, they just weren't interested in things like radio towers. And they were typically within 1 kilometer of the nest. So they were using perches further out for the longer prey runs, but it seemed like having a lot of perches within that 1 kilometer of the nest was very important when they selected where they're going to live. And then around the nest, there tended to be comparatively denser vegetation, which probably just meant there was a second shrub. And then there was variable ground cover in the surroundings. So based on that, does anyone have any questions? Yes?
When did you start the study? Looked like you had a lot of winter seeds there.
So when did we start? March was when we started surveying. There was already females sitting down on eggs in March. It was hard to get around in March, but that was then. And then we finished off when they were pretty much fledging. So when they were moving the young, when the young were already out of the nest, they would move them elsewhere, and then we'd probably lose track of them. So we ended in July. Yeah. How many eggs? Usually about 3 to 4 eggs seems to be the normal number, and most of the young would survive as long as the eggs hatched.
What happened to the backpacks?
Oh, yeah. What happens to the backpacks? So the backpacks cost a lot of money. So the pressure was on to have the owls not lose them early. So for that reason, we did sew them on fairly well, but we did use dental floss. So with the idea that the dental floss would degrade over the next year or two and the backpacks will come off. We had one Houdini that got out of the backpack the same day we put it on. So if they were angry enough at it, I'm sure they could get it off a little sooner. But we did find they did have an initial year where there was just a few owls that were caught, trying to figure out what strategies to use. And we did re-find one of those males, and he still had the backpack on, but he was also fine. They had chicks, they were doing well. So hopefully the backpacks wouldn't interfere. The backpacks were less than 5% of their body weight. So the idea being that they wouldn't have a large impact on their day-to-day life. Yeah.
I assume you don't have Modus towers out there? You couldn't use that technology?
Right, yeah, no Modus towers out there. There was no cell data most of the time. And if you did get cell data, it was probably American, and it wanted you to pay to use it. So unfortunately, no Modus towers. Those would have been very useful, though. Yeah?
So, with that many owl fears in that area, are there enough gaps in between or few spots for species at risk?
Yeah, so where we were, what we were finding was the owls had covered pretty much the whole landscape. We did have owls where we got 2 males, not Boobobot, calling just across from each other, so they would have their territories fairly lined up, sharing borders with each other. But on the plus side, there wasn't that many trees, so oftentimes they would have nested in the few available trees, and there'd be a few perches around. And if you were to remove just those 10 trees, now there's nowhere appropriate to nest within this massive area, and you would have a place that you can either use as a stronghold for a species at risk or use as a reintroduction spot. Another thing that could be used is because they do require a pre-existing nest, you could just go through and remove all the pre-existing nests from the previous year in an area. So say, for example, there's a house within your area that you would like to keep tree-free, and they say, no, I don't want to cut down my trees, which is perfectly understandable. You could say, well, you can keep your trees, but every December we need you to go through and just knock any nests out with a really long stick. So that would also be something that you could use in cases where the trees are not movable. Yeah?
I'm just curious, it seems like a very high density of great horned owls. Is that the same sort of density we would have in Ontario? Do you know?
I don't know the exact comparison. I do know the great horned owls in Saskatchewan increased a lot, and it seems to be at maximum capacity. Whereas Ontario had, I don't know if they were at maximum, but if you look at the recent breeding bird atlas data, the great horned owls in Ontario are actually decreasing. And I'm not sure why. No one's figured out why yet, but clearly we're not at capacity here anymore. There's other impacts. So it was interesting that we're losing them here where you would say there's almost better or more historic habitat.
I have 2 questions, kind of unrelated. one, did you find that there was vehicle mortality despite like the wide open spaces? And the other one, did yourselves or other folks do, like for species at risk, were you doing diet analysis? Like are people looking at their pellets around the nest to see like if they're eating, they get the burrowing out piece or if they're eating other things?
So I'll do the diet one first. So how did we know what they were eating, essentially? We didn't do a diet study. There'd actually been a diet study conducted there recently. So we had that to go off of. When we did go to the nests, not as part of our study, but working with Randy, we were doing all the nestling banding with him. And the great horned owls are very good predators out there. So a lot of the times their nests would be fairly full of prey. We also put cameras on a bunch of the nests, and we were looking at what they were bringing in. So on the nests that we looked at, we had a decent idea of what they had. We did have one nest that fell out of the tree, and we didn't know why, and we went up to it, and it had about 50 dead ground squirrels, and it had just gotten so heavy, it had just flopped right out of the tree, and it stank something awful. But you could get a pretty good idea of what they're eating from that. We did have a bunch of species at risk, even just from that not being our focus of our study. But yeah, the people have done a decent amount because collecting the pellets is actually fairly simple to do. It's, I would say, more of a question of what they don't eat, which is very small. I think they don't eat the deer or the bison out there. And then vehicle mortality. Vehicle mortality was interesting in the prairies. We didn't see any great horned owls that had a mortality. We also didn't see any raptors, as far as I can recall, just because there's so few vehicles and they're very big. So during the day you wouldn't hit them, and then at night, basically no one's driving in Saskatchewan at night because the farmers are all done for the day and there's nowhere to go. We did see vehicle mortality for ground squirrels. I know that they're drastically reducing in number, and I think a lot of that is because they're omnivorous and very opportunistic. So there was the Richardson's ground squirrel, and you would see one get hit, and then you'd see about 3 come out of the shrubbery to eat their fallen comrade, at which point they'd all get hit, and now it's just a buffet. So you'd have about 15 Richardson's ground squirrels, and you just hit them at that point, you know. So we did see some road mortality with that. Also, interestingly and anecdotally, they had the shrikes out there, and the shrikes were always on the road. I don't know if there's just really good insects above the road, but there was a lot of shrikes, and they were just always on the road. So I wonder if that's maybe a huge contributing factor to why they've done so poorly here, is our road density is even higher, and if there's no roads and they're still on the roads, then... Any other questions?
So the results of your study, then you presented it, where did it go from there?
So it had to go through some loopholes because of there was a lot of funding from the government and a few other interested parties, so they all had to approve the final results. The thesis just got published, so the idea would be to publish some scientific articles now. But all that data is now, it's already with the government, it's with the university, it's been distributed to the other universities that are conducting work on species at risk out there, so it should be informing policy on the ground now.
Can you share a little bit about pre-study, what got you into this field to begin with?
I can. Let's see, well, in university I didn't know what I wanted to do. And there was, I don't know if anyone's heard of Wild Ontario out of the University of Guelph, but they take birds, raptors, that are non-releasable from rehab. So they have a broken wing that never heals right, or they're missing an eye and they just can't fly straight anymore, but are still like healthy, and try and train them as education animals. So I got into that, and I met a bunch of people that really liked birds, and I thought that's kind of strange. And just sort of ended up doing that as I grew more and more interested. I did work I got my banding license for raptors at Pearson International Airport. I worked doing risk management there, so flying falconry birds and then trapping wild raptors and relocating them to prevent bird strikes with planes. And now I still do raptor banding at Hawk Cliff, so I guess you'll hear from George. In the fall, I do raptor banding down at Hawk Cliff Airport. Hawk Cliff, the station, raptor banding station there.
And so finally, what does the future look like for you, do you think, or where do you hope to move on to?
Well, it would be lovely if people just wanted to pay me to band birds, but that's not how the world works. I actually just got a new job in consulting, but I think the trick is to have a lot of jobs on the side. So I do bluebird banding with Bill Reed. I do the Hawk Cliff banding. I did some banding for Queen's University last summer. So all the birds on the side and birds at the work too. I think that's winning.
Any final questions? Well, Helen, on behalf of the Hamilton Naturalist Club, the Bird Study Group.
Thank you very much for coming.
Great speaker, great content. Thank you so much for coming. With that,
Feel free to grab, oh, you got Bill?
I've got some bluebird pamphlets here from the Ontario Eastern Bluebird Society, so if anyone would like one, we're always happy to have new members. And you want to, place your nest box in this pamphlet, it tells you how to do that.
Perfect, so you can see,
Anybody want one? Yeah.
see Bill for that. Come back on the 12th for the next meeting. Otherwise, have a great migration, have a great summer. Thank you all for coming, and fingers crossed for positive results tonight. Thanks, everyone. Stick still in there? Give me 1 second so I can stop streaming.